December 21st, 2024. Jeff Bezos wakes up. Nothing unusual happens. No emergency meeting. No frantic phone calls. No long night grinding in front of a screen. He eats breakfast. The world turns. By the time he goes to sleep that night, his net worth has increased from $230 billion to $232 billion. $2 billion. In a single day. Not because he worked harder. Not because he sold anything himself. Not because he invented something new that morning. Amazon's stock price moved up 0.87%. And because Bezos owns 9.5% of Amazon, nearly 1 billion shares, that small, almost invisible movement of a line on a chart transferred $2 billion of value into his name while he slept. Meanwhile, in Austin, Texas, another man wakes up. A software engineer. Talented. Educated. Hardworking. His salary is $180,000 per year, a number most people would call success. That works out to $493 per day. He gets up. He works a full day. He solves problems. He writes code. He delivers value. When he goes to sleep that night, he has earned $493. Jeff Bezos made 4 million times more money that same day. Not because Bezos worked 4 million times harder. But because the mechanism by which Bezos builds wealth is fundamentally different from the mechanism by which almost everyone else does. And that difference is the entire story. This is not a story about technology. It's not a story about intelligence. It's not even a story about ambition. It is a story about systems. Because when most people think about wealth, they think in terms of effort. Hours worked. Skills acquired. Promotions earned. But wealth at the highest level does not come from effort. It comes from position. And this pattern is not new. It did not begin with Silicon Valley. It did not begin with Wall Street. It has been repeating for more than 150 years. In 1882, John D. Rockefeller became the richest man in America. Adjusted for inflation, his net worth peaked at $400 billion, more than any modern billionaire has ever reached relative to the size of the economy. Rockefeller did not drill oil wells himself. He did not pump crude out of the ground with his own hands. Instead, he owned the system. He owned the refineries. The pipelines. The transportation routes. The distribution networks. By the time Standard Oil reached its peak, it controlled 90% of American oil refining. Every time America lit a lamp, fueled a machine, powered a factory, Rockefeller got paid. Whether he was awake or asleep. Jump forward 3 decades. In 1913, Henry Ford reshaped manufacturing with the moving assembly line. Ford's personal wealth exploded, from roughly $1 million to nearly $200 billion in today's dollars in under a decade. Henry Ford did not assemble cars by hand. He did not tighten every bolt or weld every frame. He owned the process. The factory. The equity. When the factory produced cars, Ford got paid. Even when he wasn't there. And this is where the pattern becomes visible. Because while wage earners trade time for money, owners trade ownership for compounding. Time is linear. You work an hour. You get paid for an hour. Even if you double your income, you are still trapped inside a ceiling built out of time. There are only so many hours in a day. Only so many years in a life. Ownership has no such limit. An asset produces value independent of your presence. A factory runs while you sleep. A rental property collects rent while you're on vacation. A stock portfolio appreciates whether you're watching the market or ignoring it entirely. Wage earners sell time. Owners control systems. And systems scale. This is why the wealth gap is not accidental. It is not a failure of morality. It is not primarily a failure of effort. It is the outcome of different economic engines. One engine compounds. The other exhausts itself. And every era produces its own version of the same story. Transportation in the 1800s. Oil and steel in the early 1900s. Manufacturing in the industrial age. Software, platforms, and networks in the digital age. The assets change. The mechanism does not. Now project forward. 10 years from now. 2034. The billionaires of that decade are already being built. Not in headlines. Not in viral success stories. But quietly, inside ownership structures, equity tables, and capital flows most people never see. They are not necessarily smarter than you. They are not necessarily working harder than you. They are building different machines. Machines designed to grow while they are absent. Machines that multiply rather than add. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Because modern culture tells a comforting story. Work hard. Get educated. Climb the ladder. Save diligently. And for stability, that story works. But for asymmetrical wealth, it does not. The uncomfortable truth is this. You cannot outwork a system that compounds. You cannot save your way into exponential growth. And you cannot compete on effort against ownership. This documentary is not about idolizing billionaires. It is about understanding the mechanics behind them. Because once you see the mechanisms clearly, the wealth gap stops looking mysterious, and starts looking engineered. Over the next 5 sections, we will break down the 6 mechanisms that have created billionaire wealth across every era. Ownership of appreciating assets. Leverage. Scale. Access to capital. Long time horizons. Concentration in expertise. We will trace these mechanisms through history. We will examine their mathematics. And we will connect them directly to the modern world. Not to promise you billions. But to show you, with brutal clarity, how wealth actually grows, and why most people are locked out of that process without ever being told why. Because the most powerful systems do not announce themselves. They operate quietly. While you sleep. The most important line in this entire story is also the simplest. Billionaires don't earn money. They own things that grow. That sentence sounds obvious. Almost boring. But it hides the single largest mathematical divide in modern life. Because when you work a job, no matter how prestigious or well paid, you are selling time. You work 1 hour. You get paid for 1 hour. Your income moves in a straight line. A longer day gives you more money. A promotion tilts the line upward. But it remains a line. And lines, by definition, have limits. Time is finite. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Even if you worked 16 hours a day for 40 years, there is a ceiling you cannot break through. Ownership does not have this constraint. An asset does not need your presence to produce value. It does not need your energy. It does not need your attention. It only needs position. And position is everything. Consider a simple comparison. Person A is a highly successful professional. A surgeon. A senior lawyer. A top executive. They earn $500,000 per year. Over a 40-year career, that is $20 million gross. After taxes, living expenses, and lifestyle inflation, they retire with perhaps $5 million. By any normal standard, this is success. Now consider Person B. Person B starts a company. They pay themselves $80,000 per year, far less than Person A. They live modestly. They reinvest profits. But they own 100% of the equity. After 10 years, the company is worth $50 million. After 20 years, it goes public at $500 million. After dilution, Person B still owns 60%. That is $300 million in net worth. Person B earned less salary every single year, but built 60 times more wealth. The difference was not intelligence, not work ethic, not talent. The difference was the mechanism. One person sold time. The other owned equity. This is why ownership is the first and most critical mechanism. Because equity grows geometrically, not linearly. A salary pays you once. An asset pays you again and again, not just in cash flow, but in valuation. And valuation is where compounding hides. History confirms this pattern relentlessly. Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877 with the equivalent of $240 billion in today's dollars. He did not work as a paid employee. He owned transportation infrastructure. First steamships. Then railroads. At his peak, Vanderbilt controlled the New York Central Railroad. Every person moving through New York. Every ton of goods shipped across the Northeast. They all paid Vanderbilt. Not because he worked harder than everyone else, but because he owned the rails beneath their feet. Andrew Carnegie died in 1919 with roughly $380 billion in today's dollars. Carnegie Steel produced 25% of America's steel. When the nation built railroads, bridges, and skyscrapers, Carnegie got paid. Not once. Repeatedly. Automatically. John D. Rockefeller. $400 billion. Henry Ford. $200 billion. None of them earned salaries. They owned productive systems that grew larger than any single human could ever manage directly. Now fast forward to the modern era. The assets changed. The principle did not. Software replaced steel. Networks replaced railroads. Platforms replaced factories. But ownership remained the engine. Bill Gates did not get rich because Microsoft paid him a high salary. He got rich because he owned Microsoft stock. Microsoft's market capitalization today is over $3 trillion. Gates owns roughly 1.3%. That small slice translates into more wealth than tens of millions of people will ever collectively earn through wages. When Microsoft sells software, cloud services, and enterprise licenses, Gates benefits through stock appreciation, not paychecks. Warren Buffett did not earn his fortune by working harder than anyone else. He owns 38% of Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire owns pieces of Apple, Coca-Cola, American Express, and dozens of other cash-generating businesses. When those companies generate profit, Berkshire's stock rises. When Berkshire's stock rises, Buffett's net worth grows. Whether he is active or not. Jeff Bezos did not earn $70 billion in 2023 by working $70 billion worth of hours. He owned Amazon. Elon Musk did not earn $121 billion in 2021 by billing clients. He owned Tesla and SpaceX. The pattern does not break. It scales. This is why the phrase, passive income, is misleading. Nothing about building these assets is passive. The work happens up front. The reward happens after. Ownership delays gratification, but magnifies outcome. Wages provide immediate reward, but cap outcome. And here is the uncomfortable realization most people never confront. Modern education systems are designed to train people for wages, not ownership. You are taught how to be employable. How to be productive. How to be efficient. You are rarely taught how equity works. How valuation grows. How ownership compounds. Not because it is secret, but because it is unnecessary for a system built on labor. When you step back far enough, the wealth gap stops looking like a moral failure and starts looking like a structural one. Two different games. Two different rulebooks. Most people are playing one without ever being told the other exists. And this is only the first mechanism. Because ownership alone does not explain the speed at which billionaire wealth grows. To understand that acceleration, the sudden, explosive jumps in net worth, you have to introduce the second force. A force that multiplies ownership itself. That force is leverage. And leverage, used correctly, turns ownership into a weapon. Used incorrectly, it destroys everything. Ownership explains why billionaire wealth grows. Leverage explains how fast it grows. Because leverage is not a strategy. It is an amplifier. It takes whatever direction you are already moving in, and multiplies it. Upward, if the asset appreciates. Downward, if it doesn't. This is why leverage is feared by ordinary people. And mastered by extraordinary ones. At its simplest, leverage means using other people's money to control assets larger than your own capital would allow. Most people encounter leverage early in life, but in the worst possible form. Credit cards. Car loans. Consumer debt. They borrow at high interest to buy things that lose value. The result is predictable. Interest compounds against them. Depreciation works against them. Time works against them. This is leverage pointed in the wrong direction. Billionaires use the same tool, but invert the equation. They borrow at low rates to buy assets that appreciate. Then they let time work for them. Consider a simple example. You have $10 million. You want to buy an office building worth $50 million. You put down your $10 million as equity. You borrow $40 million at 5% interest. The building generates $4 million per year in rent. Your loan costs $2 million in annual interest. You pocket $2 million in cash flow. But that is only the surface. The building appreciates at 3% per year. That's $1.5 million in additional value. Your total annual return is now $3.5 million. On $10 million invested. That is a 35% annual return. Without leverage, the math collapses. A $10 million building generates maybe $800,000 in rent. Add $300,000 in appreciation. Total return, $1.1 million. That is 11%. Leverage did not change the building. It changed the outcome. It multiplied returns by more than 3 times. This is why leverage is central to every large fortune. Sam Zell, who died in 2023 with over $6 billion, built his empire through leveraged real estate. He bought undervalued properties with maximum debt. Improved them. Refinanced at higher valuations. Pulled capital out, tax efficiently, and repeated the process. Stephen Ross built related companies using leverage relentlessly. Hudson Yards, a $25 billion development in New York City, was built with minimal equity and enormous debt. Ross did not become wealthy by avoiding leverage. He became wealthy by controlling it. History confirms this pattern. Rockefeller borrowed aggressively to buy competitors. Ford borrowed to scale factories. Railroad barons borrow to lay track faster than rivals. Modern billionaires do the same, just with cleaner balance sheets and better lawyers. Bezos raised capital relentlessly to fund Amazon's expansion. Musk borrowed against Tesla shares to fund SpaceX. Buffett uses insurance float, effectively free leverage, to invest billions. But here is the critical distinction most people miss. Billionaires borrow to buy assets. Regular people borrow to fund consumption. That single difference explains everything. One creates compounding growth. The other creates compounding drag. And leverage does something else that is even more powerful. It allows billionaires to avoid selling assets. When a billionaire needs liquidity, they do not sell stock. They borrow against it. Selling triggers capital gains tax. Borrowing does not. They receive cash. Their asset remains intact. Their ownership remains intact. The debt is serviced by the asset itself. This is how wealth stays concentrated across generations. But leverage alone still does not explain dominance. Because leverage amplifies returns, but it does not guarantee them. For leverage to work consistently, you need something else. You need an advantage that competitors cannot easily replicate. You need scale. And scale is where markets stop behaving fairly. When businesses get big enough, they stop competing on equal terms. Costs fall. Access improves. Risk decreases. And eventually, size itself becomes a weapon. This is the third mechanism. And it is the one that quietly eliminates competition before most people realize what is happening. Leverage multiplies returns. But leverage only works reliably when something else is present. Scale. Because scale changes the physics of economics. At small size, markets are competitive. Margins are thin. Costs are high. Mistakes are fatal. At large size, markets become asymmetrical. Costs fall. Risk spreads out. Power concentrates. And once scale is reached, it begins to defend itself. Imagine a local bakery. They buy flour at retail or near retail prices. They negotiate from weakness. Every supplier knows they can be replaced. Now imagine a national bakery chain. They buy flour by the trainload. They dictate terms. Their cost per unit is dramatically lower. That difference doesn't just increase profit. It locks out competitors. Because the chain can undercut prices while still earning higher margins. This is economies of scale. And it exists in every industry. Amazon does not win because it has better intentions. It wins because its scale allows it to ship faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than anyone else. Walmart does not dominate because it is ethical or unethical. It dominates because it squeezes suppliers, spreads fixed costs across massive volume, and turns logistics into a fortress. Costco, Visa, MasterCard, Google, different industries, same mechanism. Size stops being an outcome. It becomes a moat. But scale does something even more powerful when combined with modern technology. It creates network effects. A network effect exists when a product becomes more valuable as more people use it. Facebook with one user is worthless. Facebook with 3 billion users is unavoidable. The value is not the software. The value is everyone else being there. Microsoft built its empire on this principle. More Windows users attracted more developers. More developers attracted more users. Each cycle reinforced the next. Visa and MasterCard built trillion-dollar payment networks the same way. Each new merchant made the network more useful. Each new cardholder made it more indispensable. Once networks reach critical mass, competition becomes irrelevant. Because users are no longer choosing features. They are choosing ecosystems. And here is where the fourth mechanism enters. Because scale and networks unlock something most people will never experience. Access to capital. Billionaires do not compete for capital. Capital competes for them. When Jeff Bezos needs $10 billion, he does not fill out an application. He calls an investment bank. They structure a loan secured by Amazon shares at 3% interest. When Elon Musk needs $50 billion, sovereign wealth funds and private equity line up. When a regular person needs $10,000, they pay 12% interest. When they use a credit card, they pay 24%. Same system. Different doors. But access to capital is not just about interest rates. It is about opportunity. Because the highest return investments are rarely public. Private equity. Pre-IPO shares. Venture rounds. These are not available to the average investor. Not because of conspiracy. But because of structure. In 2004, an investor put $500,000 into a small private company called Facebook. In exchange, he received just over 10% of the business. 8 years later, when Facebook went public, that stake was worth $1 billion. That is a 2,000x return. By the time regular people could invest, the valuation was already $100 billion. The explosive growth had already occurred. This is information asymmetry. And it is one of the most underdiscussed forces in modern inequality. Billionaires see opportunities earlier. They invest at lower valuations. They exit after compounding has already done the work. Everyone else arrives at the end of the story. Access also changes how wealth is taxed. Billionaires rarely sell assets. They borrow against them. Loans are not income. Loans are not taxed. This is why someone with hundreds of billions can legally pay a lower effective tax rate than their employees. Not because the system is broken. Because it is working exactly as designed. But even with scale and capital, wealth does not explode overnight. It requires something most people are structurally discouraged from developing. Time. Long horizons. Patience measured in decades. And that brings us to the fifth mechanism. The one that separates those who build enduring wealth from those who merely chase it. The fifth mechanism is the quietest one. It doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't feel dramatic. And it produces no immediate reward. Which is exactly why it works. Time horizon. Billionaires think in decades. Most people are forced to think in months. And that single difference changes every decision downstream. When Jeff Bezos founded Amazon in 1994, he told investors something almost no public company CEO would dare say today. Amazon would not be profitable for years. And it wasn't. For 7 years, Amazon lost money. Wall Street analysts mocked it. Competitors dismissed it. Investors questioned it. But Bezos had something most founders never get. Patient capital. Instead of maximizing quarterly profit, Amazon maximized infrastructure. Warehouses. Logistics. Data. Market share. The payoff came later. In 2023 alone, Amazon generated $30 billion in net income. What looked like irrational patience turned out to be strategic inevitability. Warren Buffett bought Coca-Cola stock in 1988. He still owns it today. 36 years later. His cost basis is roughly $3.25 per share. Coca-Cola trades around $62 in December 2024. That is a 19x return, before counting decades of dividends. Buffett did not trade. He did not panic. He did not optimize for headlines. He let time do the work. This long-term orientation creates an invisible advantage. Because markets are volatile in the short term, but predictable over the long term. Regular investors panic when markets fall 20%. They sell at the worst possible moment. Billionaires see the same drop and ask a different question. What just became cheaper? Volatility punishes impatience. It rewards endurance. Time also amplifies compounding. A person with $1 million earning 7% annually will double their money roughly every 10 years. After 40 years, they end up with $16 million. A billionaire with $1 billion at the same return ends up with $16 billion. Same percentage. Wildly different outcome. This is exponential divergence. Compounding does not just grow wealth. It separates it. But billionaires don't stop there. They access higher returns. Private equity targeting 15 to 20%. Pre-IPO investments. Control premiums. Now compare outcomes. $1 million at 8% for 30 years $10 million. $1 billion at 12% for 30 years $30 billion. The difference in absolute gains is 3,000x. Same math. Different scale. This brings us to the sixth mechanism. The one most financial advice actively discourages. Concentration. Billionaires do not diversify like textbooks recommend. They concentrate where they have conviction. Warren Buffett concentrated wealth in a few dozen companies. Elon Musk concentrated in Tesla and SpaceX. Bill Gates concentrated in Microsoft. This creates enormous upside. It also creates risk. But billionaires accept that trade-off, because they understand their domains deeply. Diversification protects capital. Concentration creates it. If you own 100 stocks and one goes up 10x, your portfolio barely moves. If you own 50% of one asset that goes up 10x, your net worth multiplies fivefold. This is not luck. It is intentional exposure. Now look at the mathematical contrast one final time. Person A earns $75,000 per year, receives 3% raises. Over 40 years, they earn $6.1 million gross. After taxes, expenses, and modest investing, they retire with roughly $4.2 million. Person B starts a company. After 25 years, it is acquired for $800 million. Person B owns 50%. They net $400 million. Both worked hard. The difference was not effort. It was mechanism. History confirms this relentlessly. In 1975, Bill Gates founded Microsoft at age 20. If he had taken a job at IBM earning $30,000 with steady raises, he might have retired with $5 million. Instead, he owned Microsoft. By the 1986 IPO, his stake was worth $350 million. By 1999, his net worth peaked at $101 billion. That is a 200x difference. Jeff Bezos earned roughly $500,000 per year at D. Shaw in 1994. Had he stayed until 2024, he might have earned $40 million gross. Instead, he built Amazon. By 2024, his net worth is $230 billion. A 200x difference. This is why billionaire wealth grows faster. Not because of genius. Not because of morality. Not because of luck alone. But because they own appreciating assets. They use leverage to amplify returns. They operate at scale. They access capital others cannot. They think in decades. They concentrate where they understand. So what does this mean for you? Not that you should copy billionaires. You don't have their access. You don't have their scale. But the principles still apply. Shift from income to ownership. Use leverage only for appreciating assets. Think long term. Build expertise. Concentrate intelligently. Start early. Avoid lifestyle inflation. You cannot become Bezos by buying Amazon stock today. But you can stop playing a game designed to cap you. The wealth gap is not mysterious. It is mechanical. The mechanisms don't change. Only the scale does. Understanding them is the first step toward choosing a different path.